Hola, buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a nuestro evento del marzo. Empezamos en unos minutos, pero por favor silenciar su micrófono, apagar cámaras por el momento y pues pueden hacer preguntas que las pueden enviar por mensaje en el chat y por favor agregar su correo electrónico porque les voy a explicar en un momento por qué, pero eso es muy importante, ¿no? Pero durante la presentación y después de la presentación, por favor, háganos saber sus preguntas. Si quieren hacer algunas sugerencias o tienen algún comentario, por favor, escríbenos en el correo que está indicado en la pantalla ahora. Hi, welcome everyone. I just wanted to mention for those who are joining us from other non-Spanish speaking countries that you should close your mics throughout the presentation and close your cameras. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat with your email attached to it. I will explain in a moment why. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please get in touch with using this email that you see in the screen. Hoy les vamos a dar una bienvenida, introducción a SFPE Mexico Chapter. Les vamos a presentar misión y objetivos y pues presentación del ponente que tenemos hoy es Gus Gagliardi, que nos propone una conferencia cómo empezar un podcast sobre protección contra incendios y al final una clausura breve. We'll have a welcome, introduction to SFPE Mexico Chapter, and the presentation by Gus, and the closure at the very end of the presentation. Nuestra misión, como siempre nos gusta compartirlo, es promover el uso de las mejores prácticas de ingeniería, fomentando la educación y capacitación de la seguridad contra incendios en la sociedad. Our mission is to promote the best uses of practice in engineering, trying that education and capacity building of the protection against fires is something that is very embedded within the society. Nuestros objetivos son fomentar el uso de la normativa nacional e internacional en la sociedad y en especialistas en protección contra incendios, profesionalización de las personas en la ingeniería contra incendios en México y difundir la cultura de la protección contra incendios. We have as our objectives the use of norms on a national, international level in the society, across the society and amongst the society, and those who are specialists in fire protection engineering. Also professionalize and build capacity within people in Mexico who are interested and want to sort of be part of engineering. Fire protection engineering, and also spread the culture of fire protection engineering in Mexico. Nuestro ponente hoy es Gus Gagliardi, es originario de Oklahoma, Estados Unidos, es ingeniero profesional en protección contra incendios con 7 años de experiencia en la industria de la construcción. Gus tiene una licenciatura en tecnologías de seguridad y protección contra incendios de la Universidad Estatal de Oklahoma y varios años después de su carrera, Gus comenzó el podcast Fire Code Tech, que busca explorar todos los aspectos de la seguridad humana y contra incendios. Gus is a registered fire protection professional engineer with 7 years of experience in the construction industry. Gus has a bachelor's degree in fire protection and safety technology from Oklahoma State University. And several years into his career, Gus started the Fire Code Tech podcast, which seeks to explore all aspects and life safety. Una cosa que queremos comentarles que Gus no pudo venir en presencial, en línea, hoy dar esa charla, pero bueno, por unas razones de trabajo muy importantes, pero por su profesionalismo y dedicación hizo favor de grabar su presentación y hacerla disponible para nosotros hoy. Entonces, por lo mismo, les comentaba que si tienen algunas preguntas, por favor, déjenlas en chat, pero dejen también su correo para que al final Gus, nos hacemos llegar las preguntas a Gus y él les va a responder individualmente. So for a very important work reasons, Gus couldn't make it today to the event, but he is a very professional and dedicated person. Therefore, he kind of recorded the presentation and made it available to us today. So that's the reason why. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat with your email. So Gus at the end we'll be able to see them and respond to you individually. Ahora comenzamos con la presentación. Let's start. Gracias.
Hello all. Hey, welcome to SFPE Mexico March. And just want to say thank you guys for having me. And I'm excited to speak. I'm sorry that I couldn't be at the presentation in person today. I just want to say that if anybody has questions, I'll have a contact slide at the end. But feel free to message me with whatever kind of fire and life safety or podcasting and or resources information that you would like to request. I always like to help if I can, if it's a reasonable request. So I'd just like to thank you guys again, and let's get into the presentation. So I'm going to be talking about the podcast, some of my career background, and insight from where I've come from, what I've learned, and the lessons and insights I have to offer from my career. So let's get into it. So this is a overview of what I'd like to speak about for the interview or presentation for March. So I have podcast as a big umbrella topic for talking about the different equipment, skills, information, technology that are required to start a podcast. Sandra asked if I would elaborate on what kind of tools and resources are available for somebody to create a podcast for Spanish speaking people, and I would love that. I don't know of one right now, but I would encourage anybody who is interested, who is willing to dedicate the time and energy into starting and maintaining and recording a podcast on a consistent basis, that you go do it. It's been extremely rewarding for me, and it has paid for the time investment tenfold in relationships and the life experiences that I've had because of it. It's completely changed my life. So, yeah, this slide is just to say some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. I'm going to share some clips from the show and elaborate on what they mean to me, and broadly how the Fire Code Tech podcast has touched my life. I'm going to give a high level overview of the topics and subjects that are covered on the podcast, and much more. So tune in. So I wanted to give a overview of my background, where I've been in my career, so that y'all will have a understanding of my capabilities and where my specialties lie. Excuse me. Funny enough, I always start the podcast with asking people how they started out in fire and life safety. So where I've started out and how I found out about fire and life safety is in college. I was searching for a degree plan with a job opportunity, and I had been working on being a chemical engineer, and that wasn't working out for me because of the rigor of the courses. And so I found fire protection and safety technology at Oklahoma State. My grandfather's was in the fire service, so I was intrigued by fire safety and sprinklers and fire alarms. And I was told by my career advisor there was a very big job market. So I was excited, and that's how I stumbled into fire and life safety. And so it turned out that the fire protection and safety technology degree at Oklahoma State is a really phenomenal degree, one of the best in the nation, in the U.S. for fire protection. As far as technology degrees go, uh, it's one of a handful, probably less than five. I know less than five. Eastern Kentucky University, and I'm sure there are a couple that I don't know, but there's a lot of hands-on learning and training. So we got to open up sprinkler valves, use main drains for main drain tests, witness fire pump acceptance testing. We got to uh, hydrostatic test fire extinguishers and discharge fire extinguishers, and really just get hands-on with fire and life safety equipment, and really get some functional and technical knowledge about the industry, and learn from people who are professional engineers and who have worked in the industry. So that was a very rewarding experience for me at the time to speak with, you know, that's what inspired me to want to be a professional engineer. That is a big part of my journey, is seeing PEs in school that were phenomenal professionals, just really inspiring people. And that made me think, hey, that's what I want to do with my life. That's something that I think is really interesting. So graduated from college and got a job in fire suppression contracting. So worked for a company in Omaha, Nebraska, designing predominantly wet pipe sprinkler systems for a variety of industrial and um, educational and just sorry, excuse me, I get the tickle in my throat. So worked as a contractor and got to do hydraulic calculations, stock listing, uh, seeing all the parts and pieces of fire sprinkler systems, and just seeing the functional knowledge of how to put a sprinkler system together, talking with the foreman, designing hydraulic design. So I did that for about a year. Then I got a job with a full service architecture and engineering firm in Oklahoma City, where I spent nearly 5 years working on a lot of aviation and Department of Defense jobs. So lots of aircraft hangars, lots of military work across the nation, from California to DC, just doing work all over. It's remarkable that fire protection is, and aviation specifically, it was the company that I specialized in, had a real niche for. Even if you are a small company, the company I was working for at the time was only about 165 people. They had such a niche and an expertise in aviation that we would do work all over the nation. So really got to see what it looks like to do work in different jurisdictions across the US, and even a little bit of work outside the US. I was never the head designer or engineer on work outside of the US, but I did get to see other engineers work on projects in Brazil and other countries. So moving on, yeah, in the technology that I really got to design most for the architecture and engineering firm that I worked for was fire alarm and fire sprinkler systems. So I went from the contractor's role to more of a engineering uh, and design role, and I really enjoyed that. I did that for a number of years, and then recently I moved to a role for a small fire protection engineering firm, Rated Engineering, and I really have enjoyed this new role. I see a lot broader context on the industry, a bit more of business development and project management. So that has been the most recent change a little over a year ago. And so been enjoying that. So no more. I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what I've been working on. But as far as work experience on the new role, a lot more life safety, quite a bit more report writing and detailed engineering technical analysis. So it's been nice. The architecture and engineering firm gave me a very broad base of occupancies and, specifically focusing on fire sprinkler, fire alarm, fire pumps, fire water storage tanks. And now what I work on really covers everything you can think of, but still a lot of DoD, a lot of aviation, and Veterans Affairs and jobs of that nature. So this slide is the people that I'm working with now at Rated Engineering. We're all professional engineers. I just wanted to show this one quickly. Honestly, they just had a nice template for this kind of layout on the slide deck that I was working with. So I was like, might as well use it. But Brandon and Dom are my mentors now, and I really enjoy working for the firm. So just wanted to touch on that briefly. So what is the Fire Code Tech podcast? So I put the definition. Engineers love jargon and using and defining terms. So I put the definition of a podcast, and which is a digital audio file available on the internet to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, which can be received by subscribers automatically. So that is what a podcast is. Fire Code Tech originally started out as audio only. I'll be beginning to release video and audio podcasts as of 2023. I use a software called Zencaster to record. I'll be providing a big list of resources and any of the equipment that I touch on. I will throw a link in a sheet for y'all to look at if you have any interest in starting a podcast. My biggest tip for starting a podcast is if you are interested in starting, I would just start recording episodes, because I think a lot of people who think it might be a nice idea to start a podcast get overwhelmed by all the information and they never end up recording anything. So the biggest the biggest tip is start recording as fast as you can, because the longer that you prolong the setup period, the more likely you are going to stall out before you ever release anything. And the cadence for interviews right now is monthly. I used to be releasing episodes on a weekly basis, but it was unsustainable with the job role that I'm in right now. So that's a little bit on the podcast. And so, if you like this presentation, or if you don't just absolutely hate the sound of my voice by the end of this presentation, there is a pretty substantial archive of me talking on firecodetech.com. Why would you want to start a podcast? Does it make any sense? Well, I started a podcast because about 2, 3 years into my professional career, I live in Oklahoma City, which is it's the biggest city in the state of Oklahoma, but it is still a relatively smaller metropolitan area for the U.S. It's about 1 million people. So very quickly, I reached the limits of who I could. There were only 4 fire protection engineers at the time for the firm that I worked for, me being one of those 4. And so after I had asked the 3 fire protection engineers at my firm if they had experience on a piece of technology or a technical topic, and then I, perused the local Oklahoma chapter of SFPE to talk to them about what they knew about the technical topic, I was at the limits of what I had available for my social network and my ability to learn more about technical and professional development topics. And so I just wasn't okay with that. I was burning a hole in my pocket to find a way to grow more and continue to learn and make connections and really just keep developing. So that was something I didn't know if I wanted to do a blog. I wanted to do a blog. I still want to do a blog. I thought about doing a podcast, a website. I couldn't figure it out, but I landed on podcast. And so also I wanted to share, like, if I have these questions, I figured other people got to have these questions about how do you figure out hazardous materials? How would you know how to basically perform tasks regarding any variety of technical topic relating to fire alarm or sprinklers or fire pumps or fire water storage tanks, all these things. I wanted to know more, so I wanted to record these topics and share more. So one of the big themes in the podcast is careers. So here are a variety of the careers that are very common on the show. Obviously, fire protection engineers. I'm a fire protection engineer, so I interview a lot of eggheads like myself. And then I don't have as many of these guests, but they're very interesting fire and explosions investigators. Really interesting perspective. AHJs, authorities. This could be for commercial entities or also for governmental entities. One of my favorite podcasts I ever did was for the lead fire protection engineer for the Smithsonian Museums. Smithsonian Institute is a um, institute in the U.S. that has hundreds of buildings and many museums across the U.S. and I believe globally as well. So that was really fascinating. Scientists and researchers, I have that on there twice. I got more than one scientist and researcher, but that was a mistake. College professors, I've interviewed a couple of my college professors about uh, their career and also the programs that they're part of. So I'm going to play a clip for one of the fire service professionals that I had the opportunity to interview, Bill Guston. There's sometimes when you talk to a person on the podcast and their charisma and their life experiences, like you get caught up in it and it kind of takes your breath away. And so this clip is one of those moments where I really was touched and moved by a clip on the podcast. So we'll take a listen and then I will probably ramble on a little bit more about it.
I experienced some things at a very young age that have just stuck with me my whole life. In September of 1973, we were at a meeting, paid on calls, call them volunteers, and we had a call for a fire at a drugstore that was adjacent with a party wall to a grocery store. We went in there. It was a little bit of light, wispy gray smoke. As we advanced an inch and a half line, thinking that we had a fire in the storage area, about 200 feet deep into the building, we saw a bluish orange flame blow out of one of the air registers, HVAC registers. We did not know that this building had a bowstring truss roof, had a tin ceiling, and the fire was roaring in that truss loft, and we didn't know it. And thank God we were not successful in pulling that ceiling, because had we been successful, it would have been like opening up the damper of a wood burning stove. So we got out of there, and within minutes, the entire roof collapsed. It would have killed about 20 of us at a very early age. Bowstring truss. I experienced some things
So
at a
Bill
very young
Gustin is a
age
career
that have
firefighter,
just
and
stuck
getting
with
to
me my whole
interview
life.
people like my
In
grandfather who worked
September
in the
of
fire service and
1973,
hear their
we
real
were at
life
we were
experiences
at a
of
meeting. Paid on
how
calls.
they
Call
are
them
able
volunteers.
to
And we had a call for a
respond to
fire at
fires
a
in real
drugstore
life.
that was
You know, as
adjacent with a
a
party wall
design
to a
professional, I
grocery store.
may
We
spend
went
my
in there. It
whole
was a little
career
bit of light,
without,
wispy gray
attending
smoke.
a fire
As
and
we
seeing
advanced an
how
inch and a
my
half
systems
line, thinking that
activate.
we had a
So
fire in the
for me, it's
storage
very
area, about
rewarding
200 feet
to
deep into
speak
the
with
building,
people
we
who
saw a
are boots on the
bluish
ground
orange
and have
flame
functional
blow out
knowledge
of
of
one of the
what are the
air
best mechanisms
registers,
for
HVAC
laying out these
registers.
systems and
We
how
did
they've
not
seen it
know that
work
this
in real
building had
life.
a bowstring truss roof, had a
So
tin
I really
ceiling, and the
find
fire
value
was
in getting stories like
roaring in
Bill
that truss
Guston's.
loft, and we didn't know.
Technical topics, like I mentioned before, like to get in the nitty gritty on the technical topics because people have a lot of value to give and they really enjoy speaking about the technical expertise, they have. And so hazmat, hazardous materials analysis, performance-based design, so that's egress analysis, fire simulation, or a variety of other performance-based design options like for fire alarm, smart fire protection systems. Christina Francis spoke to me on an episode in the 20s, I think it's 25 or 26, about how Procter and Gamble, which she was working for at the time, have smart fire protection systems in which they can monitor the pressures and digital readouts from their fire sprinkler systems from a web application at all times, basically getting a cardiogram or uh, readout of the system in real time, pressure readings so detailed that they could know whether their system had a control valve shut that was not supposed to be shut by the pressure readings that they were getting on their web application. Occupancy related fire safety, so what's best practices for assembly occupancies? What's best practices for educational or industrial or aviation facilities? Codes and standards, of course. As an engineer, I spend a lot of time arguing over certain language or statements in contract documents, so I spend quite a bit of time in that area. Specific technology deep dive. So when I say this, I mean let's talk to a fire alarm expert. Let's talk to a fire sprinkler expert. What about special hazard systems? Take a look at all these topics and more. So my next clip is from a professional that's worked in chemical safety for a really long time. and over 30 years. And Mike Snyder is one of my favorite podcast episodes. He's just extremely intelligent, and he's talking about the tragedy in Beirut regarding the ammonium nitrate explosion and some of the factors that we knew about and know about the hazards of ammonium nitrate. So here's Mike and his take on the tragedy in the Beirut explosion.
But and I'm going to call it frustrating part about this is ammonium nitrate has been involved in large loss incidents for more than 100 years. And the basic premise and causal factors that are involved have not changed, right? So basically, ammonium nitrate is classified as an oxidizer, which means when exposed to fire, it will accentuate the fire by essentially giving it more, and I'm using in quotation marks, oxygen, but more oxidant so that you can enhance combustion. So ammonium nitrate normally as a solid, which is oftentimes in prills or flakes as it's stored, is all by itself is fairly stable and you don't worry about it. It is when you expose it to heat or contamination and store it in large quantities, that piles that are put together, and a fire occurs, the results are cataclysmic, right? It's the outcome is literally predictable, right? And a person that I mentor with, a gentleman by the name of Gordon Graham, always says, if it's predictable, it's preventable, right? You can put controls in place, and so all of the things that we need to be working on are how do you isolate the material so contamination cannot occur. And if there's going to be a fire, ammonium nitrate is generally not going to be the start of the fire. It will be some other combustible commodity. How do we end up putting that fire out or controlling or preventing the fire from occurring? It appears in Beirut that this warehouse where the ammonium nitrate was also had other commodities, particularly fireworks and probably some other combustible commodities. And so the fire likely started by an area that, something that was not ammonium nitrate. But then once the fire got going, and you look at these historical events that have occurred, usually within 30 minutes to 90 minutes, with the fire that continues to burn, you get a ferocious fire because of the presence of an oxidizer, and you progress to detonation. But and I'm going to call it frustrating
So
part about this
this
is
clip
ammonium
is
nitrate has been involved in large
touching or
loss
relevant
incidents
for
for
me
more than
because
100
fire
years.
and life safety
And
is
the
built
basic
on
premise
tragedy.
and causal
The
factors that are
lessons
involved have not
learned
changed,
from fire and life
right? So
safety
basically,
are
ammonium nitrate is
oftentimes
classified
a
as an
recap
oxidizer,
of
which means when
tragic
exposed to fire,
events
it will
and how
accentuate the
we
fire by
can be
essentially giving it
better
more, and I'm
about
using in quotation
not
marks,
having these
oxygen,
instances
but
happen
more
again.
oxidant so that you
So to
can
hear
enhance
a
combustion.
professional, a 30-year
So ammonium
professional in
nitrate
chemical
normally
safety
as a
speak about
solid, which is
how,
oftentimes in
what do we know
prills or
about
flakes
ammonium
as it's
nitrate
stored,
and what can we
is
do to
all by
protect
itself
so that
is
we
fairly stable
never
and
get
you
a
don't worry
tragedy like
about it. It
the
is when you
Beirut
expose it to
explosion to
heat
happen ever
or
again.
contamination
So
and store
that
it in
is,
large
for
quantities, that
me, what
piles that are
is
put
touching
together, and a
about
fire occurs,
episode 15.
the,
And I
the
have,
the results are
yeah,
cataclysmic, right?
Mike's
It's
a great
it's
guy.
the outcome.
Professional development. So the podcast interviews are usually structured and all in the same way. Ask the listener or the guest, what's your background? Then I talk to them about their career and their technical expertise. And then to end the interview, I always ask about career development or professional development topics. What do you see going on in the industry? What do you see as tips and tricks for professionals who are trying to better themselves? Where do you get your information that you consume to stay on top of your career in fire and life safety? So I will speak to people, and I always kind of try to weave these topics in. First of all, because that's what I'm interested in, and second of all, because I think it's fascinating to share that. And it looks like I did not update this slide, but apologize about that. But this next clip is from somebody who is involved in codes and standards development for NFPA 409. This is a firefighter and somebody who is technically very competent. And so the next clip is about professional development and how involvement is beneficial for individuals. So that's why I believe in communities like SFPE. That's why I want to take time out of my day to come speak with you all, and why I believe in institutions like SFPE and NFPA. So here's a clip from Aaron about involvement in professional societies and professional development.
The biggest thing right now, the biggest change or the trending topic is the PFAS and PFOA-free foams, and making sure they're not carcinogenic and they're safe for people and the environment. So that's the big thing kind of in the industry. And, if you think about the reason that we require foam and hangers anyways is for the risk or hazard of large fuel spills and large fuel fires. And, the industry at large isn't really seeing a huge number of those. And, and sometimes your hanger size can only house a certain size of an aircraft anyway, no matter what. And you're not going to have you're not going to have that risk of a large fuel spill, and a fuel spill ignition isn't going to be as great. So I think those are the changes we're seeing and happening. So I think it's a combination of both of those, a lack of seeing the large fuel spill fires and also wanting to go to that, the carcinogenic free and environmentally friendly type of product as well. The biggest thing right now, the biggest change.
So it looks like I misspoke. That wasn't about professional societies. It was about trending topics in the industry. So Aaron was talking about
carcinogenic and they're safe
how
for people
PFAS or fluorinated foams are on the way out for firefighter safety.
About the reason
it's been
that we
a big topic
foam
in
and hangers
aviation,
anyways is for the large the risk or
Aaron
hazard of
works
large
for a lot of
fuel spills and large
aviation-related
fuel
clients.
fires.
It's good to
and,
speak with
the
people
industry at
when
large isn't really
something new
seeing
comes along in
a
the
huge number of
industry, and
those, and
people don't really know how
sometimes
to
your hanger size can only
rationalize how to
house a
deal with
certain
it or
size
the
of an
best
aircraft
approach
anyway,
yet.
no matter what.
Of
you're not
course,
gonna have
we
the
know
same,
for light hazard
you're not going to
sprinkler
have
system,
that risk of a large
these systems have been around a
fuel
long time. There's a
spill,
lot of best practices
and
for them.
a fuel spill ignition
But
isn't
when you
going
get
to
a
be
new
as great.
topic
So
like
I think those are the
lithium-ion
changes we're
batteries
seeing
or
and happening.
PFAS
So I think it's a combination of both
foams
of those,
that
lack of
are
seeing
being
the
removed
large
from
fuel spill
systems, and we need
fires
to rapidly adapt
and also
to
wanting to go to that,
how to change our
the
approach to these hazards.
free
How do we do that,
environmentally
and
friendly
why should we do that?
type of product
And
as
so
well.
this is a clip that
The biggest thing
illustrates
right now, the biggest
that topic.
change.
Okay, now we're getting into the podcast and how to start one. So the next, I got two topics left to talk to you guys about. One is podcasting, and as much information as I can tell you about how to start one. I already told you why I started one and some of what it's done for me. But now I'm going to give you the X's and O's about what I didn't know when I went to start one. So I chose 5 topics. Well, 4 topics, and then I re-emphasized my point from before, which is if you want to do it, start doing it today. I think like any other skill in life, podcasting is something that takes repetitions and a volume of activities for you to be good at it. So get started. So the first is direction, the direction of your podcast, setup, how to set up the podcast, branding. Podcast is as much social media and branding as it is producing and interviewing. Equipment. I put equipment last intentionally. If you want to start a podcast today, I would encourage you not to go out and spend a bunch of money on equipment. I would encourage you to spend as little money as possible to make a reasonable product. I think that for less than $150, you could start a podcast. You could buy a microphone, you could buy a webcam, and you could sign up for a hosting service and get free video and audio editing software. So I think that you should, if you're interested, and we'll talk a bunch more about this in equipment, but I put equipment last for a reason. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money, especially when you're getting started. Direction. So I think it's important, I put this first intentionally for you to think about what problem are you solving. For me, it's changed over time, but the problem I was solving initially was, how do I learn more about fire and life safety, and how do I share what I learned? And so that's why I started a podcast. Who am I interviewing for the podcast, or who are you going to interview for the podcast? For me, it was anybody who would know anything about fire and life safety, whether that's people in the fire service, whether that's college professors, anybody who could know anything about fire and life safety. That was my only metric for who could be interviewed. And I'm even thinking about loosening it more than that, because once you constrain yourself with who can be on the podcast, it limits the people you can talk to. And reaching out to people, I reach out to most people through LinkedIn. People are usually pretty responsive. I'd say my lifetime response ratio from the hundreds of messages and emails that I've sent out is probably at least in the 40 to 50% reply rate. So people are usually pretty responsive. If you're respectful and if you have a reasonable request, and if you make the request personalized, don't copy and paste the same introduction and send it to 100 people. People can tell if something is boilerplate. They're going to immediately think that it's a scam or it's not worth their time, and they're going to stop looking at it. So who is interviewed is going to be a big factor for the longevity of your podcast, how many guests there are available, and then how many guests there are available. Let's talk about that. You think that, even for fire and life safety, you might think, oh, well, there's, thousands and thousands of professionals. There are 1 million plus firefighters in the US. Well, how many of those people want to be on social media or want to have their voice advertised or work for a company that would allow them to do that? And also, how many people can you get a hold of? How many people can you contact? And so you should really think about, if you're going to start a podcast, what is the guest pool size, and also what is the audience size? Something I've learned, which I didn't know before I started, was fire and life safety is a relatively small community. I mean, if you're talking about fire and life safety as compared to like finance or technology, it's millions versus billions. So you just have to think about what your audience is and your guests available, because those will be directly proportional to your ability to monetize and the long-term production ability of your podcast in the future. Setup. So your files need to be hosted online somewhere for people to get them. So you record the podcast on one of the Zencaster or one of the free software that I'm going to give you a list of. You have your microphone, you have your camera, and then you need to post your files somewhere. So a hosting service is one like Libsyn or Buzzsprout, and they take your files and they distribute them to the Spotify's and the Apple Podcasts and the other podcast playing places that you get your podcast from every week. And so how they distribute that information to other people is through something called an RSS feed. And an RSS feed is how blogs and podcasts work. They update information and it disseminates that information to the Spotifys and the Apple Podcasts of the world. And so after you set up your hosting service and you establish your RSS feed with as many podcast listening apps as you can, so you go to Spotify, you enter your URL for your RSS feed, and then you set up your account. You do that for Google Play, Spotify, Apple iTunes, podcasts, and as many as you can, because you want it to be as easy as possible for people to go listen to your content. And then, and then next you got to think of a name and for your podcast. So this slide is what is the bare minimum that you have to have before you can launch your podcast. So you need your hosting service, you need your name of your podcast, you need to set up your RSS feed, and you need to create or commission some artwork. So your podcast art needs to be 3,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels, and you can either design it on an app like Canva, which is where I designed this presentation and where I design all my podcast cover, show art. It's for free online. I would encourage anybody to check it out if they have any marketing or for professional societies or just for business. It's a nice tool to know. Branding. So I didn't know this getting into podcasting, but social media and the marketing of the podcast is as important as what you have for content. If you have the best content in the world and you are a terrible marketer, your podcast is going to not get any views because people are inundated with stimulus and information, and they are just not going to see what you have to offer if you don't post on all the social media platforms: LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. YouTube's not social media, but Facebook, all these. You need to post every time you have an episode, post, because otherwise people won't know about it. And I'm not even very good about it. So, but it's something that you have to do. Otherwise, all the hard work you're putting in to get the best guest and spend all your time prepping for the interview and interviewing people splendidly, it's not going to matter because if people don't know about it, they can't listen. So you can Fiverr is a website online where you can hire people to do a variety of marketing and artwork commission work for a relatively low price. And so for your uh, artwork for your podcast or your branding package for your podcast, you can commission somebody to do this work for less than $100 and get you a good looking set of art and podcast display content for you to use on social media or for just setting up your podcast. Tagline. The tagline for Fire Code Tech is a resource for fire and life safety professionals. So you need to think of a short one sentence statement to encompass what you are trying to tell people you're going to give them with the podcast. I put Canva and Buffer on here. Canva is where I developed and I'm recording this presentation. It's really powerful, it's free, and it is only getting better all the time. Who knows how long it'll be free, but it is right now, so go check it out. A Buffer is a place to schedule social media posts, and it's also free. So you can have up to 3 accounts, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can make one post and schedule it on all 3 platforms with Buffer. And I have multiple Buffer accounts. So with 2 Buffer accounts, it's 6 social media platforms. which means instead of going to 6 different websites to schedule a Twitter or LinkedIn post, you're going to one website and you're logging in twice. And so that saves me a lot of time, makes it easier to be consistent about social media posting, and it's free. And there are a lot of free resources, and I would encourage you to really search for free resources before you pay for something. Except for even I think audio file hosting now. I think Zencaster might even host your audio files for free. So almost everything you can find a free resource. Resources. So I put this before the equipment because, like I told you before, equipment is the smallest part of the equation. All the knowledge and the skills to get the guests, produce the episodes, and post it are 80%, and the equipment, even though it's the fun part to think about and talk about, is a very small part. So really, this is separate from the podcast material, and this is resources for fire protection professionals. So what I have a whole solo cast dedicated to resources for professionals, and I'll add the link, and there are 50 different links in this episode, solocast episode, with tools, my favorite tools for fire protection engineering, my favorite blogs, my favorite podcasts, my favorite magazines for fire protection, software that's free that I use for Revit. Revit is a 3D design software. So I'm going to give y'all, you don't have to sign up for an email list. You don't have to give me anything. I'm going to give you a link of my 50 favorite fire protection resources for nothing, because I want you to go and succeed and do good things, and because fire protection and life safety has given me so much. So this is just a slide to say, yeah, be sure and look out for those notes that Sandra is going to have for the presentation with a bunch of resources. So all the equipment I talked about, I don't get any commission or anything from the links I'm going to give you. It's all free. I'm doing it just because I want you all to be successful. So let's go into equipment, but definitely check that link out. So equipment, microphone, recording device, and program. Okay, so microphone. Let's talk about recording device and program. So I use Audacity for audio editing, and this program is recorded and captured on Canva. So I think those are easy. Those are both free. Audacity for audio and Canva for video and audio. And then, yeah, so these are the 4 big categories: video recording, audio recording, and how you're going to edit. And then ancillary stuff, there's a lot of extra podcast stuff that people are going to want to sell you, because people love to sell you stuff. None of it's necessary. You can get a pair of Apple headphones and start your podcast today. And I would encourage you to not fall down the rabbit hole of needing too many things to get started, because your first 10 podcasts are going to be not as good as your 100th podcast. And if you want to do it, if you want to be successful, you got to do a couple hundred podcasts. That's just how it is. So audio capturing. So there are 2 ways that audio is captured: analog or digital. There, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but the top left photo is a digital microphone, a Yeti blue microphone. And these microphones are not bad. I think they're around $100. They're pretty sensitive, so that's something you have to be careful with. analog microphones. You need a mixer, which is the thing below the top right. The two right pictures are all the things that you'll need. Well, not all the things that you'll need. Some of the things that you'll need for an analog setup. I would encourage you to just go digital or a USB microphone if you're going to, or Bluetooth microphone if you're going to start out, because it is a lot of cord management and it's about 5 times the price to have an analog microphone. Um, so I would say if you're starting out, definitely just use a USB or a Bluetooth headset. And then after if you get 25, 50 episodes in and you want to have nicer quality audio, you can go for the analog setup. Tips for good audio recording are you have to manage your environment. You have to make sure you don't have a fan on or an AC unit that's going, because the noise that is happening inside the room when you capture the audio, yes, you can in post-production process and eliminate that noise through editing, but it is going to be 10 times harder to get that audio to sound good than if you just make it sound nice coming into the audio first. Um, and so test your space. I did about 4 tests for this presentation. Obviously, I didn't look at all my slides though because I had a bunch of snafus. So that's my bad for not being a better QC on myself. But test your space and ask your guests to test their space. Take a listen to their audio and make sure that everything is working properly. Can't tell you how many times I've run into technical difficulties with my audio or with the guest's audio. It'll just take the wind right out of your sails and totally blow up any time you had to actually record the interview in your busy schedule. Video. So just like audio, I would encourage you to get something cheap and then work up slowly. So web camera you could buy for less than $50, or you probably already have one for work. So that's what I'm using. I don't even have a nice camera. I have a nice microphone since the podcast was audio only for a long time, but I don't have a nice web camera. I'd like to get a nice camera, and that's something that I probably will do in the next couple of years, but I don't even have those. Sony cameras or nicer cameras can get really expensive really fast. So a couple $1,000 just for the camera, not even the lens. So it's very expensive. Yeah, and then if you want to be like one of the big, really well produced podcasts, you have multiple multi-$1,000 cameras going at all times. So just like video editing, audio editing, there's a lot of free software. Canva is not really made for video editing, but you can video edit. And then also I've used DaVinci Resolve, but there's probably a dozen free video editing softwares you can download. Tips for video editing, something you can do very easily to make your video look better. Get yourself a backdrop. I'm sure you guys can see right now. I have a backdrop and it is not expensive. I just used for sound dampening and for backdrop purposes, you can use packing blankets. Packing blankets are the exact same thing as sound blankets. They are just, the difference is packing blankets are a quarter of the price of sound dampening blankets. So that is a pro tip for you. And then lighting, we'll talk about lighting in the next slide more. So this is all extra stuff. I don't think it's really necessary, but you can add quality, look to your podcasts. I'm not even following a lot of this information here on the slide, but I'm trying to be better about it. 3-point lighting system. So my lighting is not great right now. I have one light that is not a diffused lighting source and not on me currently. just in the room. But lighting is a good way to make you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. You could probably spend under $200 and make it look like a studio lighted podcast. You can add a pop of color for diversity in your video experience, and other backdrop elements like plants or books or things mounted. Those are nice for podcast visuals. And then there's a lot of cables that you could buy. Too many cables, but I won't spend any time on that. Anyways, that has been my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it didn't ramble too much. I hope it was not boring. If you guys have questions, please reach out to me. I would love to help you if you're trying to do good stuff and it's a reasonable request. I think that I am always excited when people reach out and talk to me, as long as you're not asking me to do some engineering consulting for free with some question that you have going. If you need guidance and you need mentorship, or you want to just talk to me about, getting better, I really want to talk to you. So please reach out. Thank you all for having me. I'd love to come back. But thank you guys, and I'll talk to you hopefully soon.
Tenemos en el chat algunas preguntas. Nos consulta Juan Ramón Bravo que cuál es la recomendación para seleccionar un servicio de hosting. Estas preguntas, y al igual que las que nos gusten hacer, se las vamos a hacer llegar a Gus para que nos dé respuesta puntual a ello. Por el chat les estoy compartiendo también nuevamente el link del sitio de Gus, donde podrán encontrar bastante contenido del que ha generado actualmente. Son temas bastante interesantes. Nos gustaría que dentro del medio existan profesionales interesados en generar contenido de este tipo. Eso ayudará a enriquecer bastante lo que es nuestra industria. Como bien mencionaba Sandra, Gus no nos pudo acompañarnos presencialmente. Sin embargo, pues tuvo la amabilidad de hacernos llegar la grabación, y por lo cual estamos agradecidos. De igual forma, le vamos a hacer llegar su presente, el cual otorga SFPE México a Gus Gagliari por su exitosa participación como conferencista en el capítulo SFPE México con el tema ¿Cómo empezar un podcast sobre protección contra incendio? Firma Sandra Bauchelite, nuestra presidenta, y su servidor Luis Enrique Bernal. Celebrado el día 23 de marzo del 2023 en la Ciudad de México. Dentro de las novedades y sorpresas que tenemos en el capítulo México de la SFP para este año está el Congreso IESPO, que se realizará en la ciudad de Querétaro los días 7 y 8 de junio. Esperamos contar con su presencia. Posteriormente y con anticipación les haremos llegar la información adicional con referencia a los ponentes, horarios y en específico las actividades que se tendrán durante esos 2 días. Espero nos acompañen. Recordarles también nuestras redes sociales. Estamos en LinkedIn como SFPE Mexico Chapter, en Twitter, YouTube y Facebook. Y aquí también voy a ponerles por el chat nuestro sitio, el cual también ya pueden accesar, donde estaremos subiendo información de bastante interés. Por aquí nos llegaron al chat algunas preguntas adicionales. Con gusto se las haremos llegar a Gus para su respuesta. ¿Alguien quería tomar la palabra?
Sí, nomás invitar a todos los participantes a que se afilien a la SFPE obtendrán beneficios especiales y un descuento que se está dando sobre todo para México. Luis Enrique, si nos ayudas con eso.
Sí, claro. Extenderles la invitación, como bien menciona Ricardo, de que participen con nosotros integrándose a lo que es sus membresías para el capítulo de SFPE México y su membresía para SFPE Estados Unidos. Si quieren información adicional al respecto, las pueden encontrar en nuestras redes sociales o pueden ponernos por correo si tienen alguna duda de cómo poder accesar para hacer esas inscripciones. ¿Algo más, Ricardo? ¿Sandra?
De mi parte, agradecer y estar pendientes a la siguiente invitación que será en el mes de abril y se las haremos llegar posteriormente a través de todas nuestras redes y sus emails.
Muy bien, por el momento sería todo. Agradecerles como siempre su participación. Esta comunidad hay que hacer parte de ella y que crezca cada día más. Nos vemos la próxima. Saludos.
Gracias a todos, un fuerte abrazo.